Hi, I'm David Hamburger, and in this lesson, we're going to look at how to use the form of the 12-bar blues as a roadmap for your improvising. The way that we've been talking about soloing in these last several lessons has had a lot to do with something that I think of as the lyric form, meaning it's the way that the lyrics or the words to a blues tune often unfold. And I've been demonstrating a lot of these lessons in the key of E. I thought for this lesson, we would move to the key of A and use some of the same ideas so you can see how a lot of what we've been talking about in E would also work in the key of A. So the idea of the lyric form is that when you listen to a classic blues tune, it often falls into this sort of structure where you have a short phrase and then a long phrase for the first two lines of the blues. And then you have a different kind of phrase for the last line of the blues. And that's what gives it its AAB structure, where the words have a particular line, then that line is repeated, so that's the A and then the next A. And then when you get to the turnaround musically, the words also change, and that's when you have the B line, or sort of the answer or the punch line to the first couple of phrases. And so, if you have a classic tune like Sweet Home Chicago, where the words go, come on, baby, don't you want to go? That's like having a short phrase and a long phrase. Come on, baby, don't you want to go? And then that gets repeated. Come on, baby, don't you want to go? So there's your A. And then you get the third line, which is sort of the response to the suspense set up, like go where? Back to that same old place, Sweet Home Chicago. And so that's a really typical kind of form, and you can take that form and the way that the 12-bar blues form is organized and use that to create solos so that you're not just kind of guessing or trying to fill up space. So we've already talked a lot about the idea of phrasing and of call and response, and you can go back and look at some of the earlier lessons, particularly the playing into the downbeat lesson for more on that. Right now, if we're in the key of A, we have the first four bars are going to go from A to D, and typically played with a D over F sharp, or a D7 chord with an F sharp in the bass, and then back to A for 2 bars. That's the first 4 bars of the form. Then for the next line, bars 5 through 8, you have 2 bars of D or D7 over F sharp, and then back to 2 bars of A. And then finally for the turnaround, the chords move more quickly. You have a bar of E7, a bar of D7 over F sharp, a bar of A, and a bar of E. So over that first line, we might have a short phrase and then a long phrase. So a short blues or minor pentatonic phrase starting on the root, playing the flat third and back to the root. And we could play this as a phrase that starts on the and of 3. So if you're counting it, you'd have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. And then to answer that, when you get to the D chord, you might play a long resolution or a phrase that starts on the and of 1. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. And so that fulfills that sense of like short phrase followed by a longer phrase when sung, and then also, now when played on the guitar. And so that fills up the first couple bars of the line. And so that lick over the D chord, if you think of it just in terms of notes of the A blues or A minor pentatonic scale, you've got root, flat 3, root, 4, flat 3, root, flat 7, root. And then you've got some space at the end of the line. Now, if you're listening to a band play the blues, often bars 3 and 4 of the first line after the vocal's been sung, that's where you hear like a guitar fill or a piano fill or a harmonica fill or something like that. Since we're doing everything ourselves, once you've played that opening phrase and its response, you might play a chord answer, what I refer to as an echo resolution in an earlier lesson. And so here I'm just taking a bit of an A7 chord, the flat 7 and the 3rd on the 4th and 3rd string, and and coming in from a half step below to provide a response to the initial combination of short and long phrase, and also just to, provide some commentary in that space. So now we've got a call and response between the short and the long phrase, and then a response to all of that in the form of this little double stop. And then the thing about playing the form is that if you think about what the words are doing, the second line of the blues is usually a repetition of the first line. There might be a little rhythmic variation or an extra word or two here or there, but it's basically the same thing. So if you're improvising, you don't necessarily have to play something new in the second line. You can play a repetition of what you just played over the D chord, and then coming back to A. And you could play that same kind of chord fill after that. And then, now we're coming up on the third line, bars 9 through 12. And this is where typically the words of the blues will change and be a kind of answer to everything that happened so far. So here we'd want to play something different over the E chord. And then finish it out by playing a phrase that brings you back to the A, that starts on the D chord, and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, and then resolves or brings you back rhythmically to the beginning of bar 10, which is where you come back to the A chord. So that's how looking at the way that a blues is typically structured in terms of its chord progression and the way the vocals fit over the chord progression can give you an idea of how to organize your improvising that's really, that really sort of has a sense of logic and development to it. So you don't feel like you're just filling up space, but that you're doing something that kind of takes you through the 12 bars. And so once you've done that, you can start to vary it, right? So instead of playing, you might play this lick with the flat 5 in there. And even if you play really similarly in response to that, you could then play a different set of chord hits. Like you could go back to some of those Western swing 6th and 9th chords that I covered in the chord hits lesson, and then do that kind of response. So A6, A9, A6, A9. So in bars 3 and 4. And then going into the second line. Again. So each time you come up with a new phrase, you can take it through this routine just the way verse after verse of the blues, you get a new idea and it follows through the same kind of form. Each verse of the blues follows this AAB structure. So there's no reason that when you're improvising, you can't just start off each new chorus with a different spin or a different variation on a blues lick and then carry that through the 12-bar form, maybe mixing up the kind of response that you do, maybe mixing up the kind of chord answer that you do, but basically giving your solo a kind of logic that will feel really cohesive and not like you're just sort of playing random licks. So that's an idea about how to use the form, and you can use this in conjunction with all the other things that I talked about in previous lessons, different kinds of chord voicings, different kinds of phrases, even different kinds of motivic development, right? So you don't have to start with this short, long phrase idea. You might start with a longer phrase and then shorten it. Right? So sort of working in the opposite direction, starting with a longer phrase and then truncating it and then seeing, well, what can you turn that into after that? So if you'd like more ideas about improvising, about building your repertoire, and about how to practice the different elements that go into making your improvisation more musical and more organized. You can find out more about that at my website, fretboardconfidential.com, and I'll see you next time.